We were there the first weekend, and one reason that we're not there this weekend is because we wanted to be with you, and one of the best ways for us to spend time with our friends around the world is through this Sabbath school class. Let me just tell you, for those of you that are here, it was phenomenal. This week there are 35,000 people just in the midweek in the convention center there. And Amazing Facts had a booth. And as I wandered around and visited with people, thousands upon thousands of people stopped us and came up and said, "We're part of your Sabbath school class." And so it was important for me to be back and be able to teach the lesson, because we've got so many friends around the world that do study with us, and it's a privilege. It's also frightening because the different church leaders and Sabbath school leaders, they say, "Oh, we watch the lesson to help glean a couple of extra thoughts so when we teach our class," and that scares me. I thought, boy, I better spend more time studying. And so I want to welcome our friends. Also, a lot of our members, Central has a number of members of Central Church that are around the world that don't have a church nearby they can attend. We met a number of them at the General Conference session. They said, "We are part of the internet membership of Central Church, and this is our church," and I want to welcome them as well that are watching. And so I bring you greetings here at Sacramento Central from our friends at the General Conference, and some very exciting things have been happening there. And maybe we'll have a chance to tell you more about that. And you can get some reports. Have any of you here been watching some of the General Conference session on television? And so some of you have. You've seen what's been going on. And I think they'll be replaying some of that. But to our lesson. We're going to be delving on hollow ground today. We're going through the book of Romans, one of the great books of theology. The lesson, talking about redemption in Romans, is our quarterly. The lesson today, justified by faith. And as always, we have an offer, and the offer today deals with the subject of justification and assurance, and it's called Assurance, Justification Made Simple. And for our friends in North America, if you are watching and you'd like a copy of this, just call the number on your screen. That's 866-STUDY-MORE, 866-788-3966, and we'll send you a free copy of this. And it's called Assurance. Oh, by the way, that's offer number 727, like the old Boeing jet. You can remember that. 727 is the offer number you're to ask for, and we'll send you the book on assurance. In our lesson, we're talking about justified by faith. And we're going to be, I tell you what, I'm going to do something I normally don't do. How many of you here, you have been given a slip, you're going to help us read a verse? Let me see your hands. If you're prepared to help us read a verse from the Bible. Okay, very good. Then I tell you what, Mike, you're set up to read one of the verses. I may have you be our official Romans reader today. What verse were you given? Mark 10:17. I want you to hand off that verse. Will you sacrifice your verse? Who's going to read that for? If you don't have a verse, you're willing to read it. You're not scared to be reading on TV. All right, hand that off. Go to Romans chapter 3, Mike. We're going to have you read various verses in Romans chapter 3. Now, the goal of our lesson today is we have been assigned a section of Romans, and we're on holy ground, really. It's Romans 3, verses 19 to 28. So if you've got your Bibles open, stick a little piece of paper in there, because we'll keep coming back to it, but that's not all we're going to read. It's Romans 3, 19, 28. And when we get to that, we're going to hand you the microphone several times, Mike, so that you can read the various verses in Romans. Now, we have a memory verse. We'll say this one together. The memory verse is the last verse in our assigned verses today. It's Romans 3, verse 28. And I'd like to invite everybody to say that with me. Give you a minute to find it. We should be in Romans 3 by now, okay? Romans 3, verse 28. Ready? Therefore, we conclude that a man is justified by faith without the deeds of the law. You'll find that phrase, deeds of the law, mentioned a few times in the lesson. Now, in the book of Romans, you know, when you open up Romans, we talked about the introduction and the blessings. One of the longest introductions in the Bible is in Romans. And then you start getting into what the heart of the message is. Any of you ever build a tree house? Some of you work on a tree house? I've built a few tree houses, and maybe they weren't all tree houses. Matter of fact, my kids say I've started several, but we've never finished any. And so we've got platforms and trees all over the country. We started a tree house. And one of the first things you've got to do is you kind of nail some steps into the tree so that you can scale up to where the house is going to be, because you need to be able to get to wherever the platform and the branches and the fork is for the tree. And I've done that several times. And, you want them to be strong, so you don't nail like 1-bys. Not a 1x6 or a 1x8. You need to nail 2-bys, so they're strong, but you need long nails, because they can't just go through the 2x4 that's going to be a step in the tree. They got to go through the 2x4, and they can't just get in the bark. Because, the bark of the tree, very important, but it doesn't hold the nails very well. So I usually take my chainsaw, I take the sharp end of the hammer, and I cut away the bark so you can get to the meat of that oak tree. So when you hammer those steps in, the kids aren't going to go tumbling out of the tree. And you got to make sure they get a hold of something firm. You know what I'm talking about? We've gotten through the bark of Romans now. Now we're getting actually into the meat of what is the message in Romans. What is Paul trying to tell us in this book? By the way, this book, remember, was written to the Romans, and he expected them to circulate it, knowing that it would be part of the inspired writings that were to guide us in the last days. And so with that, we're going to get right into, you got a microphone? Let's get a microphone to Mike. Who's got our microphones? Thank you, Jessica. Let's get into the first passages, and let me see here. Why don't you read for me Romans chapter 3, verse 19, Mike?
Now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may come guilty before God.
I won't ask you to raise your hands, but I'm assuming there's some of you that have gotten traffic tickets before for speeding. Is there anyone here that's gotten a ticket before for going too slow? I have. I was driving this old 54 panel wagon to Southern California, loaded down, going uphill, and I couldn't go fast enough, and all the cars were passing me. I got pulled over for going too slow. That's the only time. Most of the other times I got pulled over for going too fast. What's really embarrassing is if you get pulled over and the policeman comes up and you say, "What was the problem, officer?" And he says, "You were driving too fast." And you say, "Well, what's the speed limit here?" And he points right above your head on the street, and it says, "It's right there, 55. And you know what? Usually at that point your mouth is stopped, because the law is right there in front of you in plain view, and you can't really say, "Well, I didn't know." And he says, "It's right there. It's been all along the road. It's posted." And so what the Bible is telling us here, Paul is saying, we all know what the essence of God's law is, and every mouth is stopped. We're without excuse. We've all sinned. Now, there's a big question that's being asked here in Romans. And the question is about, how can I be justified? Why don't you read verse 20 for us, Mike? Romans 3, verse 20.
Therefore, by the deeds of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin.
All right, so he's telling us, really, how do we find justification? There were some in Rome, some especially the Jewish believers, that were saying we're justified by keeping the law. And Paul is saying the law never justified anybody. Not now, not ever. Matter of fact, be very careful to remember, as you read the book of Romans, what scriptures were in existence. They really hadn't assembled the New Testament canon of scriptures. So when Paul is talking about the writings in the scriptures, he's talking exclusively about the Old Testament. Now, did the Old Testament teach that we are justified by the law? No, don't fall for that. You're going to have some people that will say, well, we're New Testament Christians. We know we're justified by faith. Paul was talking to these Jews that believed the Old Testament, that taught they were justified by the law. New Testament, Old Testament, both, the whole Bible explains